On today's show, the Capitals aren't just winning, they're evolving into a team that actually knows who it is again.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan HOLMI. I've covered the Capitals for the past 4 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minute Cast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the Capitals are rolling right now as they pick up a big win over the Kings 3-1 in some late night action. How are they getting it done? A bit later, we'll talk about swagger, depth, and roles. And the swagger that comes from winning games, the swagger that your team is playing that much better. Ultimately, how that ties in and how the depth players are chipping in and playing a big role in this team. A bit later, we'll talk about leadership and culture. I'm talking about the moment where there was the handshake with Kopitar at the end of the game, usually something that's reserved for a playoff series or something to that extent. So a tip of the hat to Kopitar and a player that has done things very well in his career. But just to get it going here, the marquee story, even bigger than the win in the game last night, is the power play is clicking. And that is something that has eluded the Capitals for a lion's share of this season. And it's not 100% where it needs to be. But you see back-to-back games with power play goals, it definitely has the feeling that things are trending in the right direction. So let's just dive into that in the first segment here, that the power play is alive. And if you want a single thing that explains where the Caps are right now, it's how Spencer Carbery rebuilt the power play units and how those units are functioning. And you take a look at it, it was something that it just seems like it didn't work. It was the power play structured how it had been for a long time. And many people, myself included, called for it to be shook up. It just wasn't working anymore. And Spencer Carbery said, I'll fall on the sword, that this group, this power play unit, number 1 and 2, has brought a lot of success historically, that it's going to work. But then, somewhat recently here, he said it's not working, and I plan on addressing it. So what have we noticed on the ice? He put Jakob Chychrun running one unit with Alex Ovechkin, Dylan Strome, Ryan Leonard, and Tom Wilson. Ryan Leonard adds a bit of speed to that unit, while Jakob Chychrun, we have seen the great production there. He put John Carlson running the other with Ovechkin, Connor McMichael, Anthony Beauvillier, and Ethan Frank. So splitting up some of the speed between the two units there, and I think has paid off rather well. Those are the exact personnel groups the club has been rolling lately. And look, it produced a textbook simple finish last night when Tom Wilson buried the power play marker. And another guy that is just on a tremendous heater right now is Tom Wilson, his 16th goal of the season. And in yesterday's show, I was talking about him making a case for Team Canada. It's not even that anymore, just one of the best goal scorers in the NHL right now. And, is ultimately one of the pieces that's driving the engine in the offense department. And when you take a look at it, that sequence increased ease and efficacy for the man advantage and noted the unit's improvement after the overhaul. that what we saw there was really working. And it's small tweaks, and oftentimes it's not taking all of the players and throwing them in the garbage and putting different players out there. It's small tweaks. And that has paid dividends for the Capitals. So the question is why does this matter? Because it's no longer about one guy standing in one spot waiting for a miracle. It's not about Ovechkin setting up from his office at the left dot, something that he has done, for around 20 years here, and expecting that to work all the time. It's too predictable. The NHL is that much better now. And John Carlson said it's difficult. You guys have no idea how hard it is to score power play goals nowadays, much different than it was years ago. So it's about mixing things up. It's about movement. It's about unpredictability. It's about having a blue line quarterback in Chychrun who can pinch and distribute. And yes, it's also about Alex Ovechkin, 40 years old, 21st season in the league, remaining a threat that forces defenses to cheat. And that also opens space for guys like Wilson and Leonard, right? That everyone thinks it's coming from the great eight. But then what we have seen as of late, Ovechkin, Leonard to Wilson, that you're really kind of shaking up the snow globe and making it harder for teams to scout, because there's a lot of pre-scouting. The thing of it is that worked, but you got to keep mixing it up because otherwise they'll be ready for that as well. Tom Wilson put it bluntly. He said, quote, "We put pucks on net. We score goals. That's the most important thing," unquote. And for Tom Wilson, he just seems laser focused right now on helping this team win. And some people are pointing, well, he's just doing this to play on Team Canada. Who cares, right? He's scoring goals. He's helping this team win games. And ultimately, I think that's all BS. He wants this team to do great things. He is the future captain of this team at the end of the day. But his quote, "We put pucks on net, we score goals. That's the most important thing." Why that quote matters is it underscores a mentality that's simple and honest. Keep it simple. That's what they always talk about, that don't try to overthink things. Just stick to the basics. You don't need fireworks if your process moves the puck, creates rebounds, and puts bodies on net. And when you take a look at it, how those power play units are structured, it seems to be, working very well. But if you want to take a look at more of a granular level, more the nuts and bolts on why I think this is sustainable, entry control has improved because the personnel mixes pace and size. Point control has a legit guy in Chychrun who trusts his shot and is in passing lanes. Net presence is committed and physical thanks to Wilson and Beauvillier. Two solid units mean the coach can keep the pressure on without leaning on one tired group. And again, it has paid dividends out there for the Capitals, and it's something to build on. And that's the thing, like I say, that we're going to need to see going forward. It cannot fall into predictability. It has to be constantly evolving, that, you do one thing one game and then do something a bit different. And I understand that these aren't all set plays, right? That you have kind of the framework in your mind of what you're going to do. I think back to that other power play goal where Ovechkin shot it and Wilson kind of knocked it in. That seemed like that was kind of more of a setup play there. It's something they had practiced. But sometimes it's just on the fly and just, variations of what that team has done on the power play. So when you take a look at it, I think that those are things to work on. And like I said, it seems to be something that is yielding a result. The power play, effective for the first time in quite a while. Again, still a work in progress, but big picture, much better than it was before. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about swagger, depth, and roles, and what it means for the Capitals straight ahead. When I'm hydrated, everything just works better. My focus, energy, mood, even my skin. That's why I've been using Drip Drop. It's a doctor-developed hydration that keeps me running at full power no matter what my day looks like. Drip Drop isn't your average sports drink. It delivers 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading brands using a science-backed formula trusted by medical professionals, firefighters, and over 90% of top college and pro teams. The thing I like about it is it prepares you for the day. So whether I'm headed to the gym or headed to work, you feel that much better when you start your day hydrated. And with Drip Drop, it makes it so easy. And I gotta say, absolutely delicious. I love the watermelon flavor. I think you're going to love it too. Plus, they offer so many different great flavors. And right now, Drip Drop is offering our listeners 20% off your first order. Go to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard and keep your body and mind performing at their best with Drip Drop. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to thank all of you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So moving here into the second segment of the show, talking about the swagger that this team is playing more confidently. And I've talked about this on the show before. If you're an everydayer, you know that is that when you score goals and you do it on a regular basis, the power play starts working. You're not overthinking. You're not gripping your stick so tight. It flows more naturally. So the biggest line I want you to hear early in this segment is simple. 5 wins in a row don't happen if you're still confused about who you are. The run is not just shooting, it's role clarity. And you can see that reflected across the roster. You take a look at the forward lines, which we've seen out on the ice, and the defense, that the forward line combos are working pretty well. We do need to see more from certain players. I'm talking Hendrix Lapierre, for example, and I think he knows that it has been a long time since he has scored a regular season goal in the NHL, and about his future and where he lies. But big picture, if I'm going to summarize, the forward line combos and defensive pairings have been steady and have what put the Capitals in a good position. Same goes for Logan Thompson, making a lot of saves that he probably shouldn't have made, but did because of his acrobatics and everything that goes along with that. And Charlie Lindgren in his starts has played good as well. And that roster, balance veterans plus youth with clear tasks, builds confidence. It builds swagger, and it adds that speed that's been a missing ingredient on this team. I'm talking Leonard can scoot, Connor McMichael, Ethan Frank, these kind of things. That this team isn't what it was dubbed as years ago, old and slow. Still, a decent amount of older players, but the trend and I think the perception of the team is changing. But when you see that, the balance that I was talking about of the veteran and the youth and the confidence and the swagger, you can feel it in the things like a physical forecheck. You can feel how teams retrieve pucks and how quickly they move from defense to attack. And it changes how the opponents play against them. That this isn't the Capitals that maybe we have seen in years before or earlier in the season. And, opponents can't just blow past one line anymore because, you got players like Connor McMichael and Ethan Frank, 2 young guys on the team, are productive on special teams and in the defensive zone. And here's another part of the story I love. Carbery is trusting the younger pieces. Something that previous coaches didn't do. See Peter Laviolette, where he wanted to go with the sure thing, where there was reluctance to go with Connor McMichael at that time and those kind of players. But Spencer Carbery, being that he is a younger-ish coach, one of the younger coaches in the league in his early 40s there, and also his history and rapport with said players, being that he coached in Hershey and in Carolina. But having that trust is huge. When your coach has your back, that's huge. He's giving them more power play minutes. He's giving them more penalty kill minutes. He's trusting them in late game situations. And I think that players are smart enough to know that if it's a situation or a scenario or a late game situation and you only go, with the snarled old vets of, Ovechkin, Carlson, Wilson, these kind of guys, that they're like, hey, who are we? Why don't you trust me? That I think that speaks volumes of Spencer. And ultimately, why he was a Jack Adams winner last year, that this guy is the real deal. And, and having that faith is huge and not something easily quantifiable. But one of the things that I think makes him one of the best Capitals coaches ever. But like I said, that vote of confidence is huge, and players respond to that it's a one collective unit. It's not the veterans on one side and the young guys on the other. And the veterans always get the preferential treatment. Not the case. And at the end of the day, players respond to trust. When your young guys play like veterans, or at least like they're not afraid, that turns into wins. So the evidence that the Caps believe in themselves is obvious. They're not timid. They're not shrinking. And I think that a lot of the young guys are learning from example, right? You can see how much success Tom Wilson has. And you can definitely see the relationship between Tom Wilson and Ryan Leonard. It was kind of one of those moments where I was watching the game and Tom Wilson was looking at the tablet and there's Ryan Leonard kind of leaning on his shoulder. That, that there's definitely a good chemistry between the veterans on this team and the younger ones, because let's be honest here. You take a look at Ovechkin contract year, Carlson contract year, TVR contract year off the top of my head there, that it is going to very well be a different team next year. Or at least some of those players might not be here next year. So it's either now or never to finally put the faith in the young guys, because those are going to be your faces of the future. Not to mention all the players that are down in Hershey. Again, Ilya Protas pounding at the door. Give me my chance. And, I hate to say it for a guy like Hendrik Slop here, that would be a good spot for Ilya to start. How long are we going to keep going with this whole Hendrik Lapierre process? That there is options, right? And I think that builds confidence, and it's one collective buying into the system. And when leadership from veterans like Ovechkin blends with energy from the younger core, you get a roster that can weather the bumps of an NHL season. That it wasn't so long ago that I was talking to you guys about the Capitals being in last place. But last I checked, they are tied for first place in the Metro. That's something to feel good about. That is a 180. That is an about face from where they were to start the season. And it's the little things that turn into the big things. And it's not really little things, to be honest with you. It's the power play converting. It's the young guys stepping up. It's tweaking things and finding the right mix. And, the thing of it is this team is playing this well minus Nick Dowd. They're playing that well minus Pierre-Luc Dubois. That how much better will they ostensibly be with Dowd and PLD in the mix? Everyone thought that was like going to be the dagger, right, for the Capitals, that, they were playing rough. But now you take PLD out. Ouch. And then Nick Dowd out. Oh, my God. Doubling over. This team's done it. And that's resiliency. That's next man up. And that is what is making this team truly a special team. I think, on par, for winning the Metro again. I really believe it, even though they get panned. And I know that, Carolina is in there. I know that New Jersey's in there. And you've seen other teams, take their shot at it. You see the Penguins trying to get in there at points. And, it's still pretty close, right? You lose 2 or 3 games, you're up, you're down. But as of right now, as I hit the record button, the Capitals were tied for first place. A lot of optimism, something that they need to keep working. They need to keep evolving. That power play has to continue to not be predictable. And I think it will yield a positive result. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about leadership and culture surrounding this team and how is that giving the Capitals success. I'll discuss next. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting from FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets on action as it unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. So whether you're a fan of the Commanders or the Ravens or whatever team you are, open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, those games got that much more exciting because with FanDuel, live betting is the best part. When the game starts to shift, a receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover, FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment of today's show, we're talking about leadership and culture. And culture is one of those things that is something to believe in. You know, some people are like, culture, it's just wins and losses. Go out there and play your game. If there's one coach in Capitals history, you know, one of the biggest coaches to come through Washington to really change the culture was Barry Trotz, right? And all that meant, and surprise, surprise, the Capitals win a Stanley Cup, that he just came in with a mindset of, you know, respecting the organization and just a direction culturally that they'll go in. And I think that that is somewhat relatively a newer thing. Like years ago, you didn't hear as much about culture, that it's all about cultureship and creating a winning environment. But I mean, it's obvious, right? And I point to Barry Trotz because, well, the proof was in the pudding that the Capitals struggled to get over that hump of winning a Stanley Cup, finally did it in 2018. And to be clear here, a lot of that was the roster, but a lot of it was the leadership of Barry Trotz. And I think that Spencer Carbery has some of those same attributes, those same vibes, if you will. So let's dive into that in the final segment of today's show. And the big thing here is, you know, building a culture, a winning culture, a culture of respect. I'm talking about the Kopitar moment at the end of the game, where, you know, it was all the Capitals players, you know, fist bumping, walking up to a Logan Thompson, give him the head tap and the pat on the back or whatever it folds out. But Ovechkin's like, no, guys, let's take this moment to recognize greatness. Kopitar, who is going to retire at the end of the season, one of the greats to ever do it, and a really great moment. And I think something that the young guys can build off of, that, you know, you see the respect that a guy like Ovechkin has for Kopitar and everything that he's done, and kind of like, hey guys, we're going to acknowledge this moment, even though we're playing in LA and he's not one of ours. Let's take a moment to recognize greatness. And I think that that was a great moment. The handshake line with Anze Kopitar after the game was more than a nice gesture. It was a lesson. Ovechkin led the Caps through the handshake line and explained what it was all about: respect. And I have a lot of respect for that attitude. That, you know, that's what makes Ovechkin a leader, right? That, you know, at this point of his career, you know, he's kind of on the back nine, maybe on the high water mark, on the top of the mountain, looking over the NHL. And he sees all the greats that have come along with him. Kopitar is one of those. There is more respect now between Ovechkin and Crosby and Malkin than there was, you know, years ago when they were younger. Just they see where they're at in the NHL. So that respect is huge. And that's the kind of thing that matters in a locker room long term. It says we win, but we know why we play. It says our captain values the game and its history. That's the culture. And that culture is ultimately what builds a great organization. And it tells you young pros around how to carry themselves. You don't understate that. And I think, you know, especially guys for like Leonard and Ethan Frank that are so young in this league, that, you know, I don't think they would have leaned into that. And, well, they don't have the rapport or the history either with Kopitar. But I think it's a good lesson of respect because, you know, when you take a look at it, you know, desperation seeps in. The culture is what keeps a group together. It makes guys buy in. It makes a guy block a shot when he's not sure he wants to block. It makes a penalty kill unit fight for a minute in the defensive zone like their lives depend on it. And it was about a team's play, respect for opponents, and leadership showing up. So that's the big thing that I want to really underline here is wins are the currency, but culture is the bank. And you need both to get deep in the playoffs because right now the Caps have a wallet that's getting heavier. And all of a sudden they're getting that recognition. You turn on, wherever you live, if it's up in Canada, the different outlets there, but in America, the US here rather, it is, I listen to the NHL Network radio, or I listen to, the various podcasts. And for a long time to start this season, there was very little Capitals talk. But now it's working its way back into the conversation that is this team the real deal again? And like I talked about off the top of the segment there, it's about the culture, the leadership, how this team is structured. I mentioned Ovechkin and Barry Trotz before him. And then it's the trickle down. It's Alex Ovechkin and respect for greatness. And it's almost like something that you teach your kids, to be respectful when you have company come over, right? Or, that you say please and thank you. That it's almost like teaching these younger guys that when you see a guy of greatness like Kopitar in this, his final season, that you do the right thing and you acknowledge greatness, whether he's on your team or not. And again, that speaks volumes. And, they made mention of this on national media this morning before I hit record about the class act and the fans in LA there. At Crypto, clapping their hands about the whole event, that it was a class act by Alex Ovechkin and the Capitals. And this team's just in a good spot culturally, leadership-wise. The power play's going. Let's hope they can keep it going right now because they are taking on a Sharks team that is the real deal. I'm talking Macklin Celebrini on this team, who is absolutely amazing. And this team that was not so good years ago did the right thing. And what was the right thing for that team is to kind of tank, either by design or just based on how they were structured, that they got some great draft picks. And this is going to be a Sharks team, I think, that we're going to remember that we saw from years ago. You remember how hard it was for the Capitals to go and play in San Jose, that they really had a hard time winning games at the Shark Tank. I think that we're kind of slowly making our way back to that. And JD, who covers the Sharks for Locked On Sharks, absolutely knocks it out of the park. If you guys want some insight on where the Sharks are at, go ahead, tune into his podcast after this one and listen. A great podcast, a great team, and it's going to be a fight, right? You take a look at the game last night against the Kings, who I believe are in third place, that it was a battle. But the Sharks are right in there as well and are not going to make it easy for the Capitals. If the Capitals can go out here and have a successful West Coast trip, something that, years ago gave them fits, then I think we're trending in the right direction, right? That I think that we're starting to see that this team is the real deal and not just a flash in the pan. Listen, I want to thank you once again for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes the show successful. And for your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on the NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan HOLMI, and I'll talk to you again next time.